Okay, it's 10 o'clock a.m. Good morning, everyone. This is Laura Guggen from Texas OnCourse. We are in the November webinar for our monthly webinar series, and we are here to talk about financial aid. So thank you for joining us. We're going to go over some housekeeping items and the format of our webinar this morning, and mention our guest speakers. And go ahead and get started. Just so you are aware, we're in webinar format. So all of the attendees are muted, and we will have time to have questions at the end for our guest speakers and also our panelists. And if you're registered for the webinar, you will receive a recording and a link to where we post our webinars on our website. So just a couple of things about the Zoom format that we have. If you're here and you can see my slides and you can hear me speak, you're off to a good start. There's a couple of buttons we want to point out. This is the audio feature where you can change your volume and test your speakers. Like I said, if you're attending, you're muted, and you should be able to hear all of our guest speakers this morning. You can also raise your hand and ask a question. We have saved some time at the end for questions, and that's the lower your hand feature. And the Q&A box looks like this, and you can send that in. You can send it in anonymously, or we can also see your name. And we'll make sure we take a look at your questions. And you can also change your screen size up here in the top right corner and have the original slide size, which is smaller, or have a full screen. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I just want to welcome Texas OnCourse users. We always like to highlight the different content areas. We make sure to focus all of our webinar formats on these areas. And so our learning modules are divided up into career pathways, financial aid, post-secondary pathways, and now our specialty learning modules. So we actually have over 40 educators joining us live this morning, which is wonderful. We've had a great turnout and great feedback from our webinar series this school year. So as of this morning, we have 9,874 educators that are using Texas OnCourse. As many of you know, our resources were built by an original 2,500 counselors and advisors across Texas. We're also in almost 900 districts across Texas. So we've seen some really great progress, and here pretty soon we are hoping to reach 10,000 educators, and I have a feeling that's going to happen really quickly. We're almost there. We have about 125 more. So this morning, we want to give our guest speakers and our content team, the Texas OnCourse staff that has contributed to the content of this webinar, I want to give them a chance to briefly introduce themselves. And then we have some financial aid updates on the free application for federal student aid. We have some resource spotlight from Samantha Gonzalez on our staff. And then Leah Smalley from the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board has joined us this morning, and she's going to talk a little bit about the state financial aid programs and updates. It's all really good content. And then Holly Moore is one of our leader fellows, and she made some really significant gains and increased financial aid completion by 21% at her school last year. So she's going to talk a little bit about best practices toward the end. And then we will review our webinar schedule for the rest of the school year, and then provide some time for questions and answers. So this is me. I'm Laura Guggen, and I'm Senior Partnerships Coordinator here at Texas OnCourse. I've been with OnCourse for just over a year, and I work with our middle school partnership program, collect data from those middle schools. We're really looking to increase that number this year, and my background is from K-12 as a counselor and as a district coordinator. Samantha?
Hi everyone, I'm Samantha Gonzalez. I'm the program coordinator on the content and resources team for Texas, and I help maintain the content on all our offerings, primarily with the Texas OnCourse Academy. And a little of my background is I was previously with a college access and success organization that served 5 school districts in the Houston area, and prior to that, I was with Advice Texas.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Leah Smalley. I work in financial aid services at the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board here in Austin. I joined in March of 2016, and my job is overseeing the training and communications that goes out to all the institutions of higher education in Texas. Before this, I worked out about 10 years in financial aid working for a private company, and so I did all the federal programs and a lot of different jobs with those organizations. And since I started here, I've done a lot of resource development and working with schools to train them on state aid programs. So it's been a great experience for me, and I'm excited to be here today. And I'm going to turn it over to Holly.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Holly Moore, and I'm a Texas OnCourse Leader Fellow. I am in my first year as a college-bound advisor for Waxahachie ISD. Previously, I spent 2 years in Grand Prairie ISD as a college advisor. And prior to that, I worked at a couple different universities in student affairs.
So Samantha here. One of our goals at Texas OnCourse is to ensure the Academy includes infographics that you as counselors and advisors can download, print, and immediately use in your advising sessions with students and their families. And the 2 resources we would like to highlight today are entitled The 12 Common FAFSA Mistakes and University-Specific Financial Aid Policies. For the 12 Common FAFSA Mistakes handout, we took the information directly from the student aid website and turned it into a printable resource for you, the counselors and advisors, to share with students and families to hang in your office or classrooms. This handout is to ensure students and families avoid these mistakes during the FAFSA process. And one mistake we can highlight here is number 5, not getting an FSA ID before filling out the FAFSA. Having the FSA ID prior to working on the FAFSA can ensure students don't miss any deadlines. For this specific handout, you can find this document in the TASFA module. The list in this document is to inform students with DACA status about the preferred application, whether it's the TASFA or a paper FAFSA, to submit and any additional documentation needed by the institution. For instance, a DACA student applying to Austin Community College can submit either the TASFA application or the paper FAFSA, and they will also need to submit a copy of the tax transcript or a non-tax filer statement along with a W-2. And we have the rest of that information for majority of the colleges and universities in Texas. Most of our modules include an additional practice page. For FAFSA, we use the FAFSA demonstration site as additional practice. You can find the instructions for the additional practice within the FAFSA module. And for TASFA, we created a scenario about a student needing help completing the TASFA application. You fill out the TASFA application with the information we provide. There is a completed version of the TASFA application that you can compare your responses to. And also in each module in the Texas OnCourse Academy, we've generated a number of resources, including infographics and handouts that you can print and hang up in your office or hand out to students. You can find these resources throughout each module, but we also have the resources from the module we're discussing today available for you to download on our Pinterest. Here's a snapshot of the Pinterest board for our FAFSA and TASFA module resources, and you can access these boards by visiting the Pinterest website, pinterest.com/Texas OnCourse. And now for some updates on what's new with the FAFSA. The FAFSA website has been redesigned to fit the screen size of any device. The online and mobile app form provides faster feedback, meaning a student, parent, or guardian will get a really quick notification if there's an incorrect response or if a verification of a response needs to occur. as well as the threshold for an automatic zero EFC has increased to $26,000. Federal Student Aid has partnered with the IRS to inform citizens of services available. Their free help, they offer free help with tax filing through the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program. From personal experience as a previous college advisor, this service will help alleviate the burden of families not knowing where to locate services or paying someone to file their taxes, as well as paying someone to complete the FAFSA. The following are screenshots of the My Student Aid mobile app, which was recently launched. The initial view that is displayed to the user allows them to access the My FAFSA application, and it provides announcements. The Tell Us Who You Are screenshot right in the middle allows you to select which role you are playing. The role selected and dictates the FSA ID needed and how the labels display within the app. For this presentation, the student role was selected. In this view, the counselor is also allowed to sign in as a preparer for additional support to the student. However, counselors and advisors must have an FSA ID to sign in as a preparer. The user must create and re-enter their save key to begin their FAFSA within the mobile app. If they have started their app on the website and not submitted it, they will be requested to just provide the save key they entered to begin. The initial view that the user encounters are this checklist and getting started guidance view. These types of views have been inserted throughout the mobile app to support the user and guide them throughout the process. On the checklist, they can either select next or select any of the blue or green sections, and the blue arrow you see here will turn into a green check when that section has been completed. In the first screenshot, you can see an error that is displayed directly below the question. These types of edits display as the user moves through the application when incorrect information has been entered or if a required field was left blank. In the second screenshot you see here, there is a verification required edit that is displayed. In this case, the user will be instructed of the concern, and then they will either need to update the data or select the OK button. And for the signature pad displayed in the mobile app is the opportunity for the applicant to provide their signature and submit their application for parent signature. And this is the confirmation view that displays once the app is submitted. The confirmation page is a reflection of what the student would see on the website. If they went to FAFSA.gov and did their application there, the information within the confirmation page doesn't change from using the mobile app. And I will now turn it over to Leah from the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, who will provide updates on the state financial aid.
Good morning, everybody. Excited to be here, like I said earlier. Today I'm going to go through some topics that are going to be pretty high level. Like we mentioned in the beginning, if you want answers to your questions, you can type those in and I'll answer those at the end. But today we're going to go through the FAFSA versus the TASFA for those that are not familiar with the two applications, the state priority deadline changes, each of our state grant programs, our loan programs, a little bit over exemption and waiver programs, and then some of the resources that we have available to you guys in the field if you have questions that you want to ask the state. So first, let's talk about applying for state aid. Sometimes there's some confusion amongst the public on how do you go about getting state aid. So for the most part, applications should be submitted through the FAFSA. The institution of higher education will review that and award aid based on the FAFSA results. If a student cannot complete a FAFSA, they're not eligible for some reason, they can complete a TASFA. And one of the biggest misconceptions on the TASFA is that it's only dedicated to a certain population of students, which historically has been your DACA, your undocumented, or your what they call affidavit students. So I wanted to clarify that a lot of institutions actually use the TASFA for scholarship opportunities. They use it for international students. So while it was originally created to kind of serve a certain population, it has evolved into an application that is a little bit more universal, but it is only for students that cannot do a FAFSA. So if the student can complete a FAFSA, they should, because it's going to collect all the necessary information and do a lot of the data validation that is very useful when determining the student's expected family contribution. But this application is available. Again, certain schools, certain institutions of higher education don't use the TASFA and some do. So it really is up to the student to kind of do some research on which application they need to do, because the school may actually have something different that they require. And I noticed on one of the prior slides that Samantha went over that they do have that resource that shows you what documentation is required. That is different from school to school. So it's a great resource to have that, so that the student that's applying knows what they need to complete in order to meet the deadlines set at that school. So let's move on to the new state priority deadline. Hopefully you've heard about this change. It did go into effect this year. What that means is that for next fall, the 1920 year, for your fall high school seniors, the deadline to submit their application is going to be changed from March 15th to January 15th. So that is coming up in the next few months. That means that the FAFSA that was just released in October or the TASFA can be submitted now. What I want to stress here on financial aid priority deadline is that each school determines what it means to meet the deadline. So you may have school A that says that a student just has to submit the application, whereas another one says you have to be completely done with all your paperwork by that deadline. But it's really a big difference between schools. So the student would need to follow up to know what the priority deadline is. Priority deadline is only required to be published by the general academic teaching institutions by law. And so all other schools typically follow the January 15th deadline, but they're not bound to it. So again, it's important to know what each institution has set, because they do vary from school to school. And again, if you have questions specific to the state priority deadline, I'd be happy to answer those at the end. So today, again, high level, I'm going to be talking about some of the grant programs, loan programs, exemption, and waivers. A lot of these programs have overlapping eligibility criteria. They do have consistent requirements. So I'm going to go that. So once you get to those slides, you're going to kind of see, oh, that one's the same as the slide before. So I will go through those quickly so that we don't repeat the same information over and over again. Almost all federal programs and state programs do require selective service registration or to be exempt from the requirement. So this slide is just to remind people to really encourage male students when they become 18 to register, and they can do that through the FAFSA or by going to the Postal Service, or they can do it online. But we really want to push those students to do that, because it can impact them on more than just their higher education. It can limit their job opportunities and other things in their future. So it's just a big push at this point to make sure that they're aware of the requirement and to get them to do that as soon as they can. So the three state grant programs that I'm going to go through, again, high level today, are going to be the Texas Educational Opportunity Grant, the Towards Excellence Access and Success Grant, and the Tuition Equalization Grant. Each one of these programs is appropriated by the legislature and then allocated out to each school that participates. The difference between the three programs is that the TEOG program is really designated for two-year community colleges, state colleges, or technical institutes, whereas Texas Grant is intended for the general academic institutions I mentioned, so the four-year public universities, and then TEG is intended for private institutions of higher education. So again, each one has its own bucket of students that it's going to be funding. So let's talk about the first one, which is the TEOG initial year requirement. So this is going to be what a student has to do in order to qualify for the first time to get the award. These, again, it's not all inclusive, so these are just the main ones, but they do have to be a Texas resident. They do have to meet an EFC limitation for a 9-month EFC, which again is calculated either through the FAFSA or their TASFA. They cannot be enrolled in more than 30 semester credit hours or the equivalent. Again, we talked about selective service or being exempt for the registration requirement. For TEOG, a student has to be enrolled at least half-time because, again, with community colleges or state colleges, a student typically is going for less hours, so the requirement is a little bit lower compared to the other programs. And then finally, the student cannot have been convicted of a felony or a crime involving a controlled substance. So that one is something that the school will collect and will verify with the student. Texas Grant is the biggest grant program in the state of Texas. It is intended for the 4-year public universities. And again, a lot of the requirements are similar as for TEOG. You'll see that the residency requirement, the EFC requirement, the 30 credit hours is the same. The only real difference on this slide is going to be that a student must be enrolled in at least 3/4 time. And that is very important because that could eliminate the student from being in the program. Texas Grant does not allow any student less than half-time to receive money. So 3/4 time is something that the student needs to be aware of, because we do get a lot of students calling and asking, well, I lost my eligibility, what happened? And so we always ask, well, were you 3/4 time or not? So I think that that's one of the most important pieces on this slide too, to pay attention to. So in order to enter the Texas Grant program, there's 4 pathways that a student can be in to qualify. The first one is the high school graduate pathway. The student has to enroll within the first 16 months of graduating from a public or private accredited high school in Texas. The second pathway is an associate degree transfer. So the student can enroll in an eligible institution within 12 months of earning their associate degree in Texas. And then the TEOG transfer is a student who already received TEOG and transferred with a 2.5 or higher and a completion of at least 24 semester credit hours could qualify for Texas Grant. And then finally, when a student enrolls within the 12 months of being honorably discharged from the military service, they could qualify. Again, they do have to meet all the requirements, but those are the 4 what we call pathways. So in order to be considered, we talked about the state priority deadline. This is where this comes into play. If a student meets the state priority deadline, that is, again, determined by the school on how they meet that, and they have at least one of these high school graduation requirements in at least 2 of these areas, then they are basically bumped higher in priority than other students. So this is a way, if a student has done exceptionally well in high school, they're given a higher priority on getting Texas Grant. Okay, on the next slide, this is TEG. Again, you'll see some of the similar requirements for this program. Again, like I mentioned, this is for private institutions of higher education. The difference between TEG and the other 2 is that it can actually be given to graduate students. So it's a benefit of this program that you won't see with the other 2. Again, residency, same. The student must demonstrate financial need. The student cannot concurrently be receiving an athletic scholarship in the same semester or term that they're getting TEG. And like the Texas Grant program, the student must be enrolled 3/4 time in a degree plan leading to a first associate degree, baccalaureate, master's, or doctoral program. And one of the caveats of this program as well is that the student cannot be enrolled in a degree plan that's intended to lead to religious ministry. The student can be taking coursework in religious ministry, but they cannot be taking the degree plan. So the other state programs that I'll just touch on briefly are the College Access Loan and then our exemption and waiver programs. The College Access Loan is a private loan funded through the state. And similar to our grant programs, they do have to be a Texas resident, show financial need. The student would have to be meeting satisfactory academic progress once they're in the program. They don't need that to initially qualify, but once they're in school, they would need to. They do have to be registered for selective service or exempt. They have to be enrolled half-time, which is actually determined by the school. The state does not determine what that means. And then they have to receive a favorable credit evaluation, or they need to have a cosigner. So as of today, and I will say that this can change, and we don't have like a set time on which it changes, but the college access loan currently carries a fixed annual interest rate of 5.3%, and the borrower and co-borrower must have a minimum Vantage score of 650 in order to qualify. And the way that we calculate the loan is it cannot exceed the cost of attendance. So the school would calculate that for the student. Exemption and waiver programs, I really wanted to touch on this one because I feel like they're not as utilized as they could be. We don't administer these programs directly through the state, but we write the rules and the laws that go through for these programs. But the resource you're seeing on this page, I'll show you where to find that, but this lists all the different exemption and waiver programs that are available to students in the state of Texas, and there's, I think, 54 if I counted correctly last time. So knowing about these programs is a really big deal because they are underutilized, and one of the biggest ones that I wanted to mention is the foster care, or a student who's been adopted out of foster care. Typically, these students can go to school paid for. Their tuition and fees are paid for if they meet all the other criteria, and a lot of students don't know that. So if you are working with students that are in that situation, educating them and kind of getting them to the right place for them to attend college is, to me, is just invaluable because, like I said, it's being highly underutilized at this point. So let's talk about the exemption and waivers. Again, most of them are not need-based aid. So the student doesn't have to show financial need. They just have to meet all the other criteria. Some are mandatory by the state and some are optional. So that means that the school can choose if they want to participate if it's optional, and then others they're required by law to offer those to students. Exemptions are, oops, sorry.
Sorry, Leah,
okay.
I'll go back.
You're good. I'll just touch on it real quick. I just want to say exemptions are typically for special groups of students that either wipe out or pay a reduction in their tuition and fees. Waivers are usually for non-residents who have moved here from out of state to help reduce fees that typically they are for military type waivers. And that usually the student does have to meet SAP requirements to receive the award going from year to year. So real quick, I'm going to touch on some state resources that you may or may not be aware of. Let's go through our websites. We have an institutional toll-free number and how to contact us. So the coordinating board has multiple websites, but the three most important ones to know about are College for All Texans, the HH Loans website, and then our agency site. Just real quick, the College for All Texans is kind of an overarching website that includes how to plan and pay for college. And then HH Loans allows a student to apply for that college access loan. That's how they can create an account and actually do the application. And then our agency website has just an abundance of information, statistical information, legislative information. It has a lot of great resources, including some of the stuff that was on the screen prior that we distribute from the area that I work in. So if you want to call us, there is a Texas Financial Aid Information Center hotline, and this is basically for the public or for institutions or for ISDs to use. It's really just any question that you have, we can either give you the answer or route you in the right direction, but again, we call it TFAC. And then finally, if you have a question that you just need to send to the coordinating board for financial aid, On any of our websites, we have a contact us link, and when you click on that, it'll have the little picture to the right where you select financial aid question, and you can submit that to us to review, and we'll respond in writing to you. So those are the ways you can get in touch with us. So questions can be typed in the chat box below, and we'll answer those at the very end, but I'm going to turn it over to Holly, and she's going to tell you about campus level best practices.
All right, thank you so much. So once again, I'm Holly, and I am a college bound advisor at Waxahachie, and last year I was with Grand Prairie ISD, which is where this data is coming from and some of the tools and tricks of the trade that I've learned. So I want to discuss some effective strategies to increase FAFSA completion. On this slide, you'll see from 2017 to 2018 on March 15th, which was the state priority deadline for financial aid, we saw a 21% increase year over year. And in the following slides, I'll talk to you about what we did and what might work for you at your campus to help increase your FAFSA completion numbers. So some strategies that we use that might be effective for you. We did FSAID workshops before we held our district-wide FAFSA nights. We usually try to time it about a week in advance so that students and parents had time to get the FSAID and for everything to work out so that FSAID would be ready to go on FAFSA night. We did district-wide FAFSA nights. In Grand Prairie, we had 3 primary high schools, so we did 3 district-wide FAFSA nights, 1 on each campus. We sent emails to senior families, so I created a couple informational emails that my administration on my campus would send out to senior families, just telling them what FAFSA is, why it's important to fill it out, what to expect. And then I also did some targeted emails to senior families who I knew that the student had applied to college but hadn't completed a FAFSA. We worked with some community businesses to create incentive programs for FAFSA completion. So one incentive was our local Chick-fil-A was really great, and they gave us free Chick-fil-A sandwich cards. So if a student completed FAFSA, they could come show us proof, and then we would give them a free Chick-fil-A card. We worked with economics classes because within the TEOGs for economics is information about FAFSA. So that's a great place to leverage some campus relationships to increase your FAFSA completion, is to work through your econ classes. Last year I did presentations in the econ classes and worked with those teachers to do one-on-one pull-outs to pull students out to meet with them to talk about FAFSA. And this year in my current district, I am working with my econ teachers, and they're actually giving extra credit for FAFSA completion. So I'm working one-on-one with them to make sure that I share my data with them so that they can verify who has completed the FAFSA so they can get that extra credit. And then just some resources that I was able to utilize. While I was in Grand Prairie ISD, I was fortunate in that we had a relationship with Commit, which is based, they work in Dallas, and they work with lots of districts to help increase not only FAFSA completion, but just educational attainment from pre-K all the way through college. And some of the tools that I was fortunate enough to learn through Commit, one being PDSA, which is the Plan, Do, Study, Act model. And this is a really great tool to use when you're planning either like a FAFSA night or if you're going to do any sort of activity or intervention, so that you can actually assess if it was an effective intervention or activity. So I would sit down, and when I would plan a FAFSA night or any other activity, I would plan it out. Who's going to be in charge of what? How are we going to advertise? What is our goal? Then we would do it, and then we would come back the next day and we would assess what the outcome was. If we wanted 10 people to show up, did we get 10 people? If the goal was 15 FAFSA completions during that event, did we get 15 FAFSA completions? And then The ACT part is assessing, was it effective? Would we want to redo it, or would we make some tweaks, or would we just not do it again? And then my favorite tool is the run chart. And this is something that if you utilize, it's great to share with upper administration and the school board to show what a great job you guys are doing down in the trenches, one-on-one with your students. So it's a really great little Excel spreadsheet that you can plug in your numbers and track week to week. And as you can see with that run chart, there's 3 different lines. So what I would do is, if I did a FAFSA night or a intervention, I would put a little arrow by that week and mark that I did an intervention, so I could measure what percentage increase week over week did we get. Something that was really effective for us at South Grand Prairie last year is we did one-on-one pullouts of students. We would have them come into our office. We would have them start their FAFSA with us. So we'd help them get their FSA ID, log in, and put all their student information into FAFSA. Then we would tell them to go home and talk to mom, dad, or guardian, whoever that is, and complete the process. Once they left, we would follow up with a phone call to either talk to that parent or leave a message about that their student had started the FAFSA. And we saw some of our biggest spikes in FAFSA completions based on doing that.
Okay, thank you so much. I just want to kind of point out a couple of things. I know financial aid is something that gets a lot of attention from school boards, from all of the different organizations that we work with, from community-based organizations, and there's a huge push across the state of Texas to increase financial aid. And so we definitely wanted to talk about some really high-level items like the priority deadline changing. That's a huge thing for this particular year. I think that I'm really glad you mentioned the selective service, because there's a lot of steps that go into the financial aid process, and that's definitely one of them. I feel like the grant information and the EFC thresholds are something that people always ask about. And so also same with what you mentioned, Holly, in terms of best practices and things that really move the needle at your campus. So I just want to say thank you to Samantha from OnCourse, Leah from the Higher Ed Coordinating Board, and then also Holly for all that valuable information. So these are the rest of our webinar schedule for the 2018-19 school year. On December 4th, we're going to talk about successful course planning and endorsements. I think schools are gearing up to do the course registration process. Sometimes people start that first semester or fall semester, and sometimes that gets going in January. So we'll have some content on that. And then January, I think even though we had some great content here on financial aid, we also want to talk scholarships. So I want to highlight that one as well for January. And you can see the rest of our topics through June 4th. So we will send the recording for this webinar out to everyone that's registered, as well as the PowerPoint, because these are actually links to register. And then we will go ahead and I will check our questions and our chat box, and we can all stay on the line and make sure we answer some of our questions from our attendees. And I don't see any right now, but we'll give it a few minutes.
And while we're waiting on questions, I would love to share, this is Holly again, that I've learned from my connection at Commit that actually TexCan received a grant at the end of last year, and they're actually going to be creating kind of like a FAFSA run chart for every district in the state. So each district would be able to log in and see their progress week over week, instead of going to that FAFSA completion by campus from the federal government and then having to dig through all that data.
That's great, Holly. So thank you for mentioning that. We work really closely with TexCan, so we'll get that information and see if we can send that out. Let me go back to the questions because I see one. We will send a copy of the slides, Lupita. We will send the PowerPoint slides so you can have those as well as the webinar recording. Okay, well, I don't see any other questions. We answered what was there. Again, thank you to our guest speakers and to OnCourse content. I know financial aid changes every year and it becomes more, we have more and more questions on all of these different topics. And so we answered a lot today. So with that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and end the webinar and send this out to everyone. Thank you so much. Okay, goodbye everyone. Take care, have a great day.